now been 5 days since the OceanGate submersible called Titan went missing, a little under 2 hours after beginning its tour of the Titanic wreckage. As of Sunday the 18th, there was hope that the passengers were alive, and search and rescue teams scrambled to retrieve them as oxygen was dwindling, but it's now been confirmed that the small vessel imploded in an instant. Debris of the submersible has now been discovered. There are many questions that have arisen in the course of this ongoing search for the missing vessel, and this is what I'll be discussing with you today. Now, I'm not going to get into conspiratorial stuff here. These are real people who have lost their lives here, and it's a sad case. With that said though, let's start off with the first question on everyone's mind. So the first and most obvious question is what happened? For a while there was a lot of speculation. The dive had just begun. It left its support vessel, an icebreaker that ferried the small submersible out to the site of the Titanic wreckage where it began its descent, and just an hour and 45 minutes later, all contact with the submersible was completely lost. Now, this isn't unheard of. There have been other dives, including previous ones made by the Titan itself, where contact was lost for a period of time, so there was a chance the crew were still alive. Unfortunately though, on Thursday, June 22nd, a French deep sea robot discovered what looked to be debris of some kind, which was confirmed just a few hours later to be the Titan's tail cone. More debris was discovered, and it's been confirmed the Titan suffered a catastrophic implosion, but we still don't know what caused this implosion. Was the submersible simply structurally unsound from the start, or did it receive some kind of damage during its descent? There's a chance we may never know. And the next question on a lot of people's mind is what took so long? I'll get to that in a minute, but in terms of the sequence of events, for the first few days of the search there was hope. The search and rescue teams believed the Titan to either be below the water or somewhere above it, but after Canadian and US Coast Guards had combed the area extensively with ships and aircrafts, it became pretty clear that if the missing submersible was bobbing on the water somewhere, it would have been spotted. So it was determined that the submersible had either sunk or was completely destroyed. So again, why wasn't the debris discovered sooner? Well, first of all, we still don't know exactly when the vessel imploded. Second of all, the depth the Titan was at is very deep. Finding a very tiny submersible like this is extremely difficult, especially when it's in pieces, and there aren't many vessels that can descend to that depth. It's hard to picture just how deep 12,500 feet is. This image here shows some famous landmarks compared to the depth of the Titanic wreckage, which really shows like the sheer scope of this situation. The Titanic wreck is twice the depth of the Grand Canyon. Not only that, but it's incredibly dark and murky down there. Finding a tiny vessel like this so deep down is like searching for a needle in a haystack. The next question we have surrounding this whole incident is why? And this is mostly in relation to the passengers on board. There are some very prominent, powerful people on board, and this has, of course, led to some people online speculating or just wondering perhaps this incident was somehow planned. I don't really want to get into stuff like this. Once again, there's just no evidence that would lead me to believe that this is the case. People are just saying this because the men on board are rich, and while conspiracies have been known to take place, there are also so many that are just completely baseless. And the fact of the matter is, expeditions like this are dangerous and accidents happen. At the end of the day though, it is almost impossible to know for sure. Speaking of how dangerous a dive like this is though, let's talk about the conditions of the Titan itself. Over the past few days, it's been coming to light that this vessel was rather precarious in its construction, that perhaps it just wasn't ready to be doing deep dives like this. David Pogue, a CBS News reporter, joined the crew of an OceanGate Titanic expedition last year and made a statement about the conditions of the submersible. He said, "I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of the sub seemed improvised." Pogue was also shown a video game controller by Stockton Rush, the CEO, which he said was used to control the whole vessel. Now, that's actually not unheard of. These types of controllers are used more frequently than you might think. However, he also read some of the waiver which stated the sub is an quote, experimental submersible vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, or death. And that is going to lead us into our next point. Titan was not classed. This means the vessel didn't undergo the proper testing and inspection needed to have it approved as being, up to industry standards. According to Stockton Rush, the CEO, and one of the passengers unfortunately aboard the missing submersible, the decision was made in order to avoid a multi-year approval process. Essentially, its rollout was rushed, and Rush has made it quite clear in the past that regulations aren't much of a concern for him. Innovation has always been his main goal, and that regulations often hold back this desired progression, according to him. He stated in a 2019 interview that they have all these regulations, but it also hasn't innovated or grown because they have all these regulations. So next, I want to talk about the fact that OceanGate was actually sued at one point. These concerns about the safety of this experimental vessel haven't just come from people with no experience or knowledge of the subject. In 2018, a former employee of OceanGate, David Lottridge, ended up filing a lawsuit against the company, saying he had been wrongfully terminated after voicing concerns about the Titan submersible. Lottridge is a submarine pilot who made complaints that the Titan wasn't capable of descending to the depths it was being designed for. At the time he voiced his concerns, he was the director of marine operations. It was his responsibility to bring concerns like this forward to make sure passengers and crew would be safe. He refused to greenlight manned tests of the early models of the submersible, and what happened? He was fired, and not only that, he was sued for revealing confidential information about the company, which was a breach in his contract. And this is when Lottridge filed a counterclaim. David Lottridge was fired for being a whistleblower, but why? He was doing his job. Why did the rollout of the Titan vessel need to be rushed, it seems? We'll likely never get a truthful answer from OceanGate. It's not just David Lottridge that voiced his concerns, though. There is another former employee who voiced his concerns about the safety of the Titan. We don't know who this person is, however, as they've asked to remain anonymous, but they were also a former OceanGate employee. This individual was working at the company around the same time as Lottridge was, as an operations technician, and had concerns about the thickness of the Titan's hull and how it would adhere with the glue that was being used. The hull was made of carbon fiber, which they had been expecting to be 7 inches thick. When the hull arrived, though, it was only 5 inches thick. The employee would resign after Rush dismissed several questions and concerns brought forward by a number of employees. So the question here, once again, is why was Rush so dismissive of those who had been hired to inspect the vessel and make sure it was safe? And next we have the noises. A Canadian aircraft, the P-8 Poseidon, had picked up a series of banging noises with the sonar equipment and buoys they had set out. The noises seemed to come in 30-minute intervals. Now, the question is, were these noises coming from the passengers aboard the Titan, or were they just other noises coming from somewhere deep beneath the ocean? There are a lot of sounds down there. It's hard to really pick out one signal and figure out exactly what it is. Search and rescue teams immediately focused their efforts on the area where these sounds were detected, though, and they had hopes at first. Perhaps these sounds were coming from the trapped passengers banging on the hull, but unfortunately, there was still no sign of the Titan, and as to what those sounds were, there have been no definitive answers. And it seems like at this point, we may never know. There are theories with experts saying it could actually be the Titanic wreck itself causing the noises. A piece of it could be moving in the current, and of course, there's tons of marine life that could have caused the sounds as well down there. Next, we have an interesting statement made by a man named Kevin Williams. In 2021, OceanGate's legal representative formed the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia that the submersible had undergone scrutinous testing and was incredibly safe. According to this legal representative, the Titan had undergone, quote, detailed engineering and development work under a company-issued $5 million contract to the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. But according to the director of the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory, Kevin Williams, this isn't exactly true. Kevin Williams was quoted saying the laboratory was not involved in the design, engineering, or testing of the Titan submersible used in the RMS Titanic expedition, end quote. Apparently, the lab had only been involved with the shallow water implementation of the vessel, so it seems like there's been some shady practices going on with OceanGate. So let's sum this up by talking about safety measures in general, though. I've touched on this throughout most of the video, but it seems as if there weren't many safety measures in place. Diving to such incredible depths is never 100% safe, but the more that's come to light about OceanGate and the construction of the Titan submersible, it seems like it was inevitable that something would go wrong. And on top of all that, no plan in case of an emergency seemed to have been factored in. I mean, and in terms of what you could do in a situation like this, obviously, I'm not an expert, but certainly there should have been more testing on this submersible. But why wasn't there? Unfortunately, at this point, the oxygen in the small craft has most likely run out, and they may never be found. It's a sad, frustrating, and disturbing case. With that said, though, I will see you all in the next video.